Hello, my name is Lana Wong. I am a senior from Team 2073 Eagle Force Robotics. I will be your moderator today for the virtual Robocamps presentation. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that you can ask any questions regarding to this presentation in the chat, and then we'll address those questions in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, speakers, can you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here with you all. My name is Mike Corsetto. I am the lead technical mentor for Team 1678 Citrus Circuits. I've been mentoring the team since 2008. And specifically, I've helped start our Davis Youth Robotics Outreach Program, which we'll explain in a little bit, and been involved in a number of the other outreach initiatives that the team's had over the last 7-8 years.
Hi, my name is Ellie Kim. I am on Team 1678 Citrus Circuits, and I have been on the software scouting sub-team for 3 years. This year, I am the Robocamps lead coordinator, and this is what we did for our virtual 2020 Robocamps.
Awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit on a higher level about outreach and just try to take a small step back and think about why we're doing this overall. So, we're going to focus a little bit later on especially our virtual Robocamps and how we got there. But for us, outreach projects are means to an end. And so specifically, what the first thing that we encourage all teams to do when they think about outreach is why do teams do outreach? Why does your team do outreach? And for us, we have a team motto: educate, empower, excel. And specifically on the empowerment point, we think a big driver for our outreach initiatives is how are we empowering our community, specifically in STEM and STEM education. So we like to think about our community and say, okay, so like we look at the community makeup. What needs does the community have specifically? Are there any acute needs in the community? Any gaps that we as a FIRST Robotics team can fill? And then are there any specific programs or skill sets that we have that we can utilize to fulfill those needs? So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those programs. The other question that you can ask too is a lot of times, especially if you're a newer team and maybe you're thinking about outreach or you've been doing outreach for just a couple of years, there may be existing organizations in your community that are doing really good work that you can partner with. And so the other question to ask not only is, what can we do as a team, but you can ask what are other groups in our community doing that we can get involved in and support and maybe expand. So I can give you a little bit of an example of how this looks in our own community. So Davis Youth Robotics, we call it DYR for short. That's our envelope that covers 3 different branches of youth robotics in our community. Obviously, our whole program started at the FRC level with the high school robotics program. We have one main high school in Davis. We have a couple of smaller charter schools that feed into the main high school, but we only have one FRC team in the community. And obviously, that's only serving 9th through 12th grade students. So in 2013, we looked and saw that there was a need to get students involved in robotics before high school. And so that's when we started our first FLL team. And that FLL team eventually rolled into a 3-branched youth robotics approach in the community where we have Robocamps, which we're going to talk about a lot today. But we also have a program for schools where we support teachers starting either robotics clubs or integrating robotics into their classroom. And then we also have a league branch of the Davis Youth Robotics program that's focused on forming a AYSO Little League style league in our community where we support parents that want to start robotics teams after school with their students and their students' friends. So all 3 of those programs, were started out of this need that we saw in the community to get pre-high school students excited about STEM and about robotics. A totally different approach to outreach that resulted in a unique program on our team is Shelter Finder. Shelter Finder is an app that helps first responders locate open beds at homeless shelters. So specifically, this was a partnership with existing programs because we aren't starting a homeless shelter, but there is a number of homeless shelters in our community and the towns around us that we interviewed, partnered with, kind of learned about the issues they have, and then developed this app based off their feedback and the feedback from first responders. So this was something where we saw the ability for our team with our technical know-how. We have a lot of students that can do apps and programming and stuff like that to be able to support an existing program in the community. I'm going to hop forward here. So all that's really great, and we've really enjoyed being able to build these programs up over the last number of years. But the pandemic has obviously thrown a wrench into everybody's plans. I know Frank mentioned how the first season is changing for 2021, and there's a lot of exciting new things. And I think FIRST is actually a great example of an organization that is trying to think creatively about how do you run a robotics, really a STEM inspiration program in the middle of a pandemic. Because really FIRST ultimately isn't about the robots. FIRST is about inspiring students to study science and technology. So for us on 1678 and every team that is looking to make an impact in their community through outreach needs to be thinking about how does our pandemic approach change or how does our outreach approach change for a pandemic? So obviously, first question, does our program require in-person interaction? We know that the virus isn't spreading over a Zoom call. It's spreading when multiple people are in the same room together. If the program can possibly be modified, what would those modifications look like? And we'll talk a little bit about some of the programs we've done that to. Sometimes, kind of the uncomfortable truth is not every program can be adjusted for safe operation during a pandemic. A good example of this is our Citrus Service program, which is focused on helping teams at competitions get their robots fixed or get their robots up and running. And we have a specific crew of students that's committed to that one role. We can't do that outreach when there's no competitions. And so that program has had to essentially be put on pause during the pandemic. But with that program being on pause, we have some bandwidth available to maybe support other programs. So we might be utilizing the people that normally would be preparing for events and participating at events in Citrus Service. Maybe we can find other ways for them to build in the community. So then the other kind of the flip side of the coin of putting programs on pause is with the pandemic and quarantining, there's actually like somewhat of an opportunity there. A couple of the aspects of those opportunities, we found that students can sometimes have more free time, particularly if a lot of their extracurricular activities have been put on pause outside of robotics. Maybe that frees up more time. And rather than just having that time go to maybe, another couple hours of playing Among Us with your friends, like maybe that time can be put towards developing, programs or developing resources or preparing for when, in-person things happen down the line. So we have a lot of free time to work with. And actually on 1678, a lot of that has looked like putting more effort towards better training and better like online training for younger students on the team. So a lot of our veteran team members who normally would be more involved in-person outreach events in this time of the year have been putting more of their time and effort into preparing presentations and lessons and stuff like that. And then we have a plan to actually, maybe upload those later so more teams can benefit from that work. Online software like Zoom and Hangouts, I know we're all getting very familiar with these platforms. They're very powerful. Another really cool thing about these platforms is it actually allows since everybody has started to move to online meetings in some sense or another, there's a good opportunity there for inter-team networking. And a great example of this is 2468 Team Appreciate has their First in Focus series. 1678 was actually invited to participate in it back in I think it was late spring, early summer. And 2468 was really making an effort to say, okay, we're all getting used to these online meetings. Why not connect teams through these online meetings? And so we actually had a really great private session, just our team and 2468's team, where we got to ask each other questions and just have a longer extended conversation outside of the First in Focus series that was broadcasted. But that's another great example of a team thinking about, okay, this pandemic is obviously changing how we do things, but maybe there's actually opportunities here to make connections and build up our team and inspire more students through these virtual meetings. So really cool stuff there. Okay, so I think I actually covered some of these things. One of the additional, I don't want to spoil what we did for Robocamps because I think Ellie's going to talk a lot about the details, because I think Robocamps is one of the ways that we've made some really drastic changes for the pandemic season we're in right now. The Compass Alliance is another thing that I haven't mentioned yet, but it's an inter-team program that we've started with a bunch of other FRC teams around the world. What's actually kind of ironic about the Compass Alliance is we've been meeting since 2017, and for the entire time we've been meeting, we've always been a Zoom call online program, because the Compass Alliance is a group of teams from around the world. We're not going to be able to regularly meet in person. And so when the pandemic hit, our meeting schedule for the Compass Alliance actually continued as it was from the beginning. So the Compass Alliance has focused a lot more of our time and a lot more of our cumulative team resources towards creating more documentation and a couple of new things that we're hopefully going to be announcing in the next 3 to 6 months. But we've been able to focus more time towards Compass Alliance initiatives because a lot of the work was already virtual, and we're able to continue to build up those programs and start new things within the Compass Alliance. So like I said, there's obviously a ton of drawbacks, and this pandemic has been hard on all of us in one way or another. But there's some opportunities that if you're working hard at it and you're looking at your team structure and your team's resources, identifying ways to continue to move forward, even in the middle of a really hard situation. So this is kind of draws out what that looked like for us. And I mentioned before, so obviously Citrus Service, all events are canceled. That is a red. We cannot continue with Citrus Service as the way it is. So we're moving those resources into developing training content and possibly content for the Compass Alliance. And the Compass Alliance continues as it was going before because everything's already online. And then for Robocamps, it looks kind of like a hybrid of the two. We can continue Robocamps, but it needs to be altered significantly to continue. Okay, and last thing, this is not going to maybe come as a surprise if you've been watching what a bunch of first teams are doing, but especially when the pandemic first hit, there was a really sudden need for personal protective equipment. And I think a lot of FRC teams saw that, and there was a lot of stories of teams filling in the gap and providing that gear. I think that obviously there was a mixed bag with the PPE push that we saw in the first community. I think there were some really well formatted, responsible efforts that were put together. And then I think the unfortunate thing is the excitement of that particular initiative. You hear stories of teams that snuck into their school to grab their 3D printer, without their school admin knowing, or something like that. You hear stories like that where teams are not following proper safety protocol in order to make PPE. So that was not what we wanted to do on 1678. So we specifically, found ways to utilize existing resources that we had outside of the school or if we could get school approval to have a teacher on campus, we could utilize school equipment. But we did do some work, developing or producing some small amounts of PPE. And then we also, it goes back to supporting existing partnerships. If you see in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a 3,000-pound roll of plastic. And back when the PPE craze was happening, there was a big push to make a bunch of visors, but plastic became really hard to find. And so I was able to connect with a group down in the Bay Area that had a relationship with Coca-Cola. And if you don't know, Coca-Cola uses a lot of plastic because they make a bunch of soda bottles. And so we were able to get a partner there at Coca-Cola that donated this full spool of plastic. 1678 wasn't going to be able to make enough visors to use all this plastic. And so actually a majority of this plastic was donated from us over to another group making visors in the Sacramento area, a city right next to us that had a lot more bandwidth and more space on their laser cutters to make a bunch of visors. So that was another example of our program partnering with other existing programs in the community to make an impact without having to do all the work ourselves or come up with all the ideas on our own. So so that's just a little bit of another story of work that was done. But again, actually, all of this in-person work was done by adults on the team, and really only one at a time for the most part because of the safety issues there. So it's not gonna be the right fit for every team, and it's important above all else, like Frank says, none of this is worth risking your safety over. So safety first in all things, including pandemic outreach. Great. Ellie?
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, especially for introducing us to all the outreach that we do on Sister Circuits. So we have a question for you guys, and we want to know, has your team ever hosted a robotics camp? So that is the main type of outreach that I'm going to be talking about today after this poll. So I think Lana, our wonderful moderator, has probably put it in the chat by now. So you can just respond, and then we'll show you the results in a few slides. Right now, nobody's responded because it was just sent out. Great. So what are our Robocamps? So in 2019, this is what our Robocamps usually look like. They are in-person summer camps with like friendly competitions and smaller pairings of kids. As you can see in the picture, there's 2 kids practicing driving a robot, and that's like a typical pairing you'll see during our summer Robocamps. The camp days are from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and then the counselors are loosely assigned to groups to make sure that everybody is working together and everything's going well. Usually everything will have like a competition at the end of the week, and there will be little tasks and challenges in between to make sure that everybody's working on their robots and having a good time. But as you can see here, there are a lot of people in that room. So that's not feasible for 2020 and our pandemic. So when COVID-19 hit, we realized that we did have enough time to modify our Robocamps program because the pandemic shutdown in Davis occurred in March, while our Robocamps programs start in June. So we had enough time, and we figured, hey, you know what? Let's try and change this outreach program and make sure that we can have a safe and welcoming environment for everybody while still making sure everybody has a great time and learns robotics. So, what changes did we make in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? We realized that we needed to follow stay-at-home orders, and we needed to adjust our price ranges for all of our tickets and stuff to actually get into the camp. If you remember in the earlier slides, Mike was talking about what needs does the community have in our outreach programs, and that is one of the most important things you can look at when you are creating an outreach program. So when we modified our Robocamps this year, we realized that there would be a community need in terms of flexibility over price ranges, especially since a lot of people can't go to their jobs because of the pandemic or other things like that that require that create some financial strain on the families within our communities that we didn't want to provide on these people. So what we did instead was we modified our refund and scholarship policies so that anybody who asked for a refund before their camp started and anybody who asked for a scholarship would be able to get one if they needed that. We also had to adjust a lot of the logistics for our camps. Originally, we would send out an email with all the forms or hand the people the forms in person, and they would give them to us on the first day of camp. And then we would have all of our materials for the camps in that big room that you saw earlier. So like each kid would have a kit and a friend that they were working with, and they would both work together to build a robot. But obviously we couldn't do that this year. We didn't want people in the same room and not touching the same equipment and all that. So what we did instead was we had a special kit pickup. So we have a parking lot at our high school that we set up so that somebody could stand there with all the kits and then deliver each one as a parent drove by in a car, so that there was there's less direct transmission and everybody would stay safer. We also realized that because we were going on a virtual platform, we would have to change our schedules and times. I don't know if you're like me, but when I am on a Zoom call for 9 hours, I will get tired and I will not want to be on that Zoom call anymore. So our original camp schedule was from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., which was infeasible for both the counselors and mentors who would be helping in Robocamps, and especially for the elementary school kids. I don't know if you tried to make an elementary school sit still for that many hours alone, much less staring at a computer screen, but it's not that easy. So we wanted to make sure that everybody would still have a good time so that we could still have that interactive Robocamps experience without exhausting anybody. So instead of the 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Regular schedule, we changed it so that there would be 2 blocks of time where you were supposed to be on the call, an hour each, so 9 to 10 and 1 to 2. And then the rest of the time was break time or independent work time. So you wouldn't have to be at your computer at all. You could go play with your robot and try and do the challenges and work on your own. And then, of course, if you needed help or had any questions, you could come back on the Zoom call and work with the counselors there and get some help and maybe see some other kids there if you wanted to be on that call at that time. But it wasn't required, so that everybody would still have a good time and not wear themselves out while enjoying the camp experience. Okay, so before we get into this next poll, we would like to see the results from the previous poll, if you could put those up there. It looks like nobody responded. That's no fun. Okay, well, that's fine. In terms of having a robotics camp, most people, I don't think, switched online, which was perfectly fine, because you should only do what you can handle with your resources and with your time, so that you don't burn your students out and you don't create an undesirable outreach experience for anybody who's participating. And then we have another poll for you guys. Okay, so you have to use the code up here. Sorry about the confusion. If you want to take this poll right now, that would be excellent. There's a code on the top, 8971791. Great. And then we can wait a little bit for responses on that. And then we have another poll for you about having a virtual outreach program. But while we wait, I can just talk, because everybody wants to hear me talk, right? That's what you're here for. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we did originally for our Robocamps. So it may seem those camps stacked up really quickly because everybody was very interested in getting their children into that sort of camp. Some people wanted their kids there because their kids wanted to be there, and some people wanted their kids there so that they could go to work during the summertime and their kid would be safe and somebody would be watching over them and they wouldn't just be running around the house possibly causing destruction or whatever. So it seems like a lot of you have actually hosted a robotics camp before, so maybe you know what these look like. But changing this to a virtual landscape is pretty difficult because some of the demand for this type of outreach was because of the sort of daycare aspect almost, where we would be able to take care of your children and watch over them and make sure they had a good time. So replicating this in a virtual scenario was significantly more difficult, especially with the gaps in time. So their parent had to be responsible and watching over their child during that time because we didn't want to keep kids on a Zoom call all day. But it does seem like most of you have hosted a robotics camp, so you know more along the lines of what was provided and what needed to continue to be provided and what we would do in terms of switching it to a virtual landscape. Can you show the next poll so that we can try that one out? If the numbers have to be on screen, that'd be great. So this is our second poll. This is the virtual outreach program. So we're curious if you have done any sort of thing online, like moving all your outreach to a virtual setting, which is significantly difficult, and you would have to have done that this year mostly, unless you've done something like the Compass Alliance. But it looks like a lot of you are saying no, which is completely reasonable because this has been a crazy year and we don't know what is going on. And we're just trying our best to adapt so that everybody can still have that experience that we wanted to give them in our outreach. But that's good to know. Looks like it's evening out a little bit. But every virtual outreach program is different depending on the outreach program you're doing. So outreach is very community-based and need-based. So depending on what the needs are or how the needs have changed, you have to change your outreach program to be able to fit in a virtual setting. Great. Can we go back to the slides? Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so what we did for our 2020 virtual Robocamps, I was talking about it a little bit, but we were having Zoom meetings for each day of camp so that we would follow stay-at-home orders and make sure that everybody was safe, but people could still talk and interact on screen. And then we modified the schedule, as I said earlier, to be an hour block, two 1 hour blocks in a day so that nobody would get overwhelmed. And then we would put people in breakout rooms. So if you remember on the 2019 slide that I showed, the counselors were sort of loosely assigned to different groups of kids. But this year we couldn't do as much of the floating type of arrangement we had last year because of the simple fact that we couldn't actually see what everybody was doing at any given time. And if you've been in a gallery breakout room where there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things, it's really hard to tell who's doing what and how you can help somebody there. So what we did instead was we took about 5 kids and put them in a room with one counselor. And so they would all sort of get to know each other and be able to bond and have that experience that you would have in a regular camp where you get to meet other people and have a good time. And they would also have the guidance from a counselor and just be able to problem solve in a group, and anybody else who had that same problem could talk to them about it and solve that issue. It's also really important that you have that bonding time, especially for younger kids during the pandemic, because a lot of kids can't go out and see their friends or go play with their friends or even just go to normal school and interact with the other kids there like they usually would. So having something like these breakout room groups is incredibly important, especially for younger kids' social and emotional intelligence. We also made sure that we had individual work time so that kids wouldn't have to be on the Zoom call the entire time. And we had to create some new challenges because previously we would have like timed challenges or races around certain mazes and competitive challenges where you would work with another team and then together your robots would try and do something. But clearly we couldn't do that because the robots weren't actually in the same places due to our distance setup. So we sent some individual, like newer challenges for kids to do that they hadn't done before. So things like, oh, how many blocks can you program your robot to stack? Can you do more? Can you modify your robot? All sorts of like, can you program your robot to go through a maze? what happens if you change the maze. And then instead of the competition at the end of the week that like we usually had in our 2019 Robocamps, we still wanted those kids to have a chance to show off what they had done and feel proud of the work that they had put into their robots over the entire week, and show that to the other parents that might be watching, or the other kids, or the counselors, or the mentors, or whoever they wanted to show on the last day of camp. So we had a show and tell session where each kid could send us videos or pictures of their robot and then talk about their robot, or give us a live demonstration, just like they would have in the 2019 Robocamps. Yeah. This slide is not changing for me. Okay, well, that's fine. So on the 2020 virtual Robocamps were significantly different also because we had to have different roles. So you can't see them on the slides right now, but in the 2019 we had an adult mentor, a lead counselor, and the counselor roles. So the adult mentor is sort of like the responsible person in charge for looking over the entire camp and making sure that nothing dangerous happens, and they're responsible for contacting like the parents if something goes wrong, or if a kid needs to be taken home or something like that. And then we had the lead counselor who was running the Robocamps and like interacting with the kids and making sure that everything was running smoothly. And then we had the counselors who were working individually with each group of kids. But in 2020, we had to add the Zoom counselor, and all the roles changed a little bit. So the adult mentor and lead counselor both were leading the meetings, and the lead counselor was giving the announcements and helping manage issues that would occur with individual kids. And then the Zoom counselor, we had to add this role in because we had never needed it before, but when you're running things on Zoom, you want somebody to be able to help troubleshoot and deal with all the technical aspects of the meeting. So they will help troubleshoot technical difficulties with the meeting itself or with individual kids or counselors, and they also run the Zoom aspect of the meeting. So they start the meeting, they organize the breakout rooms, so you have to be pretty proficient with technology to be able to do this. And then the counselors would be in each breakout room with a group of about 5 kids, helping them out and making sure that everybody was having a good time and trying to get them to interact and bond with one another so that they could get that experience that they didn't always have before. Okay, so while it's easy to look back on what we did in this past year for our Robocamps and say, oh, like, look at what we did, here's some good stuff that you can do, it's really not that easy. So in a virtual landscape, there are a lot of different problems that you face. And if you're going to start an outreach program that's online, or you're thinking about starting an outreach program that's online, you're going to want to know some of this stuff so that you can like look ahead and be like, okay, if I ever have this problem, how am I going to address it? So within our own group on these 2020 virtual Robocamps, we faced some technical difficulties. So our resolution for this was to create the Zoom counselor role and make sure that everybody has a practice with Zoom. So every week, the day before the camp started, we would have a Zoom test call where all the parents and the students who were going to be in the camp would log on and then test their audio and test their video and all sorts of things like that, so that we could try and sort out any difficulties that would happen before the camp started. We also had some communication issues, which is already just, communication is a hard thing to do in general, but it's so much harder when you can't just go up to somebody in person and be like, hey, did you get the update about whatever? So because of this, we had to make sure that we were really good at communicating virtually. So we would have to do meeting announcements. Like in our general meetings on Citrus Circuits, we have an announcement section where we will talk about anything important, such as like the outreach programs that we're working on or how you can participate in them. We had to make sure that we had our websites updated at all times, because sometimes new forms would have to be put up there, or parents would have questions that they wanted addressed, and all sorts of things like that. And the updates on the websites are incredibly important, especially because that is what your user interacts with. So if you're a parent and you're looking for information, you're going to go to the website first, which is why your websites have to be updated with all your latest information as soon as you can get them up there. We also had to send a lot of emails to make sure that everybody was on the same page and that we could keep updating all the campers at once, so that everybody would hopefully be on things at the same time and get the same updates at the same time. As a team, we also used the Slack platform, which was really useful during Robocamps, especially because we'd have channels for each week of Robocamps for just the counselors, where they could say, hey, this kid is having a problem and I don't know how to help them. Can somebody hop in this room and help me out with this? And things like that, so that counselors could assist each other and get the help that they need, just like in 2019 in person, where you could just be like, hey Mike, you want to help me over here because I don't know exactly what's going on and this kid has a problem with their robot. So that was sort of our way of doing that, so that counselors could still communicate. So another thing that we did that was really important in terms of specifically Robocamps online was we had a few documents with changes that we would make each week. So if somebody had a common problem, you could say what that common problem was and then a solution to that, so that anybody in the future weeks could look at that and be like, hey, this kid has a problem. Let me see if anybody in the previous weeks had this problem. And so there would be a documentation of the solutions that we would have for that issue. That way it would be a lot more efficient and the knowledge could be passed along much easier. We would also have tips and tricks for each week that they would add to this running document, so that if you're like, hey, maybe I need to ask all my kids to have their videos on and near their robot so that we can all see what they're doing all the time. Or doing icebreakers in our breakout rooms is a great idea and now all the kids are talking to each other, or things like that to help the entire overall experience get better. Please remember that this is a new thing, so when you're doing this type of thing, you have to be flexible and always work on improving your program. Because it's a new landscape for everybody, but the better you can make it, the better it will be. There are, of course, some benefits of going virtual during COVID-19. It's not the most ideal situation, but we can work with it. So there are some cool things about going online, that participants can be from anywhere. We had a kid in a different state participate, and because as long as they can get the kit and can return the kit, then they can come from anywhere. And if they're gonna travel to see their grandparents or whatever, they can still bring that robot kit with them. You can participate from anywhere in the world, which is so cool, because that means your outreach programs can expand and they can help anybody, anywhere, at any time, especially because sessions can be recorded. So if a kid misses a week, or misses a day in a week, and they're like, oh, what did I miss? You can just send them a recording, or you can send them the documentation for the challenges for that day. And then this is so powerful, especially when you go into other outreach, like this, Capital City Classic. Today we're all on this YouTube live stream, but after this, it won't be live streamed anymore. So it will be recorded, which means you can send this to somebody who lives in a different time zone, who can't come to this time, if they want to learn about this, which is incredibly useful. And then for us, using the Zoom platform and doing these breakout rooms and groups really helps with social and collaborative skills, even though nobody can really go interact in person safely. So these kids will still get this experience, even though they're sheltering in place. And then, of course, the best part of Robocamps is learning hands-on robotics and practicing STEM over the summer. Even if you have to stay at home and you can't go to school, you can still do something that's super interesting and really engaging, even if you have to stay at home. So, finally, we have some tips for you. If you ever are thinking about running a virtual program or are planning on running a virtual program or currently are running a virtual program, these are some tips that could be really useful for you. So you, first and foremost, you need to be very flexible because the situation is always changing. The laws are always changing. What's safe even is always changing. So you need to make sure that you're up to date on the latest information and that you are willing to adapt to whatever circumstance comes up. If you can't do that, then it's much harder to run a virtual program because you need to constantly be assessing the needs of your community as an outreach program and then what is safe and feasible for you and your resources and your team. Because you don't want to burn anybody out or make a program unenjoyable for the people who are running it also. So you need to make sure that you are very flexible about what's happening with your program. You also need to make sure that you are communicating consistently and openly with everybody, because if you leave somebody out of the loop, things can go crazy. If you don't have your parents updated, then maybe they won't go to the meetings at the right time. If you don't have everybody behind the scenes updated, then maybe some counselors won't show up, and those are some of your most important people in terms of running virtual Robocamps. You just always need to make sure that everybody is updated and knows what's happening and that you know what's happening. And making sure that this happens is really useful both on the sides of the people who are working behind the scenes and for the parents and customers who are trying to use your outreach program or benefit from that. You also need to make sure that you know your platforms. If you don't know your platforms, things will get confusing and convoluted and really hard for everybody involved. For example, if you don't know Zoom very well and your parent or your kid has a problem with their Zoom program, how are you going to help them troubleshoot that if you don't know how your own thing works? If you don't know how Zoom works, you can't run breakout rooms. You can't have those groups of kids interacting with each other. So you need to make sure that you know everything you're working with pretty well and that you train everybody ahead of time so that everybody knows this. And then always make sure to learn from your mistakes. One of our most useful documents this year was just things that we could improve on from week to week or from day to day. And I think that made our overall Robocamps experience a much better time for everybody involved. So hopefully that helped you in terms of what you know from the Robocamps now and what you know about a virtual program. But we are going to go into the Q&A now.
All right, so I'm looking through the chat and it looks like no one has asked anything, but I have written down a few questions during the presentation. So the first one is, would virtual Robocamps be a possibility after the pandemic due to all the benefits that you said about connecting to other regions and other parts of the world?
Mike, if you don't mind me, I'm gonna answer. So in terms of the Robocamps situation, it's a camp that everybody can really enjoy and be a part of, but it's better if you have it in person because people can work together. Like, you can actually bond with somebody and get to know them better. I think there's a huge difference between making a friendship in person while you're working on something together versus online, sort of distanced. And then we have competitions that I think a lot of kids found as one of the best parts of the summer camp. So there are a lot of benefits to going virtual, but I think there are still more benefits to staying in person over that. Mike, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think, Ellie, what you said is spot on. I think we can acknowledge that the in-person events are more engaging, right, and they have a lot of upside. However, I think one area where these virtual camps may still be beneficial is specifically when thinking about maybe there's students that are not able to attend an in-person RoboCamp, where we might be able to fill the gap and say, what if we had like one week a summer that was a virtual RoboCamp, and we found a way to get kits to kids that were in more remote areas that maybe still had internet access, but they weren't close enough to participate in a day camp easily. That could be a good option. I think we also learned a lot from doing the RoboCamps that's going to let us do more remote STEM education in the future. So there were some important lessons there that will carry over, even if we're not doing week-long Robocamps.
All right, we have a question in the chat. It says, "How any chance you're willing to share what your RoboCamp kits have inside of them?"
So our RoboCamp kits are actually just VexIQ super kits. We did do a couple of things. I don't think Ellie got into like the nitty-gritty technical details, but for our VexIQ super kits, we did a couple of things that made the process easier. So Ellie, you mentioned the kit loaning, right? You mentioned that as a part of your RoboCamp spiel. So we were loaning these $300, $400 kits to a new family for a week, and then they were returning that kit. And you can imagine a kit with hundreds of pieces, things are going to get very disorganized. So VexIQ out of the box comes with a plastic organizer with some trays in the top, but there's still kind of like an open area in the bottom with not a lot of organization. But Vex also sells an add-on foam organizer for a couple bucks that we bought. So every major piece had its own slot. And so when the kits got returned each week, our lead adult could just open up the box, check to make sure that everything was in its proper slot in the foam organizers, and then throw it in. And then the other thing that we bought a little like a VexIQ puller tool that helps connect and disconnect the little peg pieces and stuff. That got really positive reviews when we added that to the kit halfway through the summer. But other than that, it's just a basic VexIQ super kit. Vex actually has a lot of great summer camp curriculum that they've prepared. And I don't know if we've published anything yet about what we did this summer, like documentation wise. But, Ellie, I'm wondering if that might be something valuable just to maybe at least do like a one-pager white paper or something like that about what we did and any important takeaways.
Yeah, I'll make sure to get that out. Also worth it to note that we had to make sure that, I believe these are in the super kit, but I'm not 100% sure. We needed to make sure that there was a color sensor in the kits for the advanced programming weeks. So something I forgot to talk about was there are different weeks that we had set up. So there was there's the introductory intermediate week, which is like the basic clawbot that we had, and some easier challenges for those just getting into robotics or VexIQ, or those who haven't like used robot software before. And then there would be the intermediate advanced camp, which is more of the more complicated robot structures and challenges for those who are older or who have done Robocamps or robotics or VexIQ before. And then we would have the girl-powered camp, which is a girl-specific STEM outreach week where we would try to get, we'd encourage females to join STEM and have like a week where it's just them. And then we would have our advanced programming week, which changes the most every year because we redesign it. So that's the one with a bunch of difficult programming challenges, and sometimes you require different vision sensors for that. This year we had a color sensor, I believe, and also different colored cubes from the high-rise challenge to practice color sorting and stacking those in terms of like what we would have in a kit. So it depends a little bit year to year for advanced programming, but otherwise we just use the super kit. Also, a shout out to all of our mentors who worked so hard to make sure that there was documentation for all of that, getting all the organizers, the foam organizers, to make sure that everything worked out. And for those who stayed and made sure that the kits got to the right people and they got them all back and everything, we could not have done it without you.
All right, there is another question in the chat. Any reason you chose VexIQ instead of Lego Mindstorms?
I go into this a little bit in a talk I gave a year or two back about, I think it was 2 years ago. You can find it in our team's YouTube archive. It's VexIQ and the STEM pipeline. So I kind of go a little bit more in depth there. But I will say there's a couple of things that we really like about the VexIQ platform. I think a couple of things that come to mind. The first from a like a base level education perspective, VexIQ has this controller that comes in every super kit that allows for a really tactile link in student engagement. So they build this robot with the stock instructions in their first year of Robocamps. They build the robot to the stock instructions that comes in every kit. They load on the stock software that is pre-programmed on every brick, and then they turn on this controller, and then they're able to use a robot, which is a huge deal for like a fourth grader who's never done anything like this before, and especially for groups that may not be exposed to STEM as often. So think underserved minorities, or think girls that may culturally be pushed away from STEM in one way or another. The confidence building that comes from having those basic things prepared for you to engage with, and then have this payoff, which is I can drive a robot around and pick up these cubes and do some really awesome stuff, just by the things that I did just now, right? Like, that's a huge deal. And I will say that, like, the downside of Lego Mindstorms, obviously there's so many cool, intricate things that you can do with Lego Mindstorms, and you see these insane robots every year in the FLL competition. But Lego Mindstorm doesn't have that really direct link from I follow and then I load stock code on and I have a really cool robot to engage with. Lego doesn't really have that right now. It's way more on the tinker, like I'm really into robotics, so I'm really into all these small pieces and coming up with creative things in my mind. That's great, but that doesn't really get at where you want to hit with students that aren't yet inspired to study STEM. You want to tee them up for success, and that's what the VexIQ platform does in our view. And it makes everything that, like, we could not have done our virtual Robocamps this year without VexIQ. I 100% believe that. There was no way we were going to do that on any other platform that I know of.
I also know that there's a good amount of documentation for a lot of Vex things. So there's like Vex forums. I don't know if there's the same thing for Lego because I've never actually been in that league. But I know that Vex got me hooked when I was younger, and that's why I'm on FRC right now. But I think it's a lot easier also to be like, okay, so my robot works. Like, it can drive. I can drive it. So things can happen with it. And then it's like, now where do I go from there? How can I make it better? Like, what can I try and tinker with? And I know I can't break this because, like, the instructions are really easy, and this is the stock code that I have, so I know it'll still drive, even if I, like, break the part, which is okay, because I can just rebuild it later. But it gives you also that independence and freedom to sort of experiment and, like, not be afraid that, what if my robot just stops working? Like, what am I going to do then? So I think that's also really liberating, especially when you're new to STEM and robotics.
The next question is, how can someone recreate your very awesome virtual Robocamps? So just briefly go into the different steps of how you implemented it and got started for it.
We'll try to go quick because we only have a couple more minutes left before we need to wrap up. But you need to start by developing a customer base. So a lot of times that could be families on your FR that have your siblings, or that can be like local schools if you can get promotion through the junior high and elementary schools in your region. So you need to build up a customer base, and then you need a registration process for that customer base. So we use Eventbrite, right, Ellie? We use Eventbrite. Eventbrite is an online event registration tool, and then you need to recruit your counselors from your FRC team, and then you need to have an adult that's going to be the responsible adult in the room, kind of in charge of overseeing everything. And then from there, it's about organizing, prep, training, and then having the events. So I think a lot of our white paper that I'm hoping we can do can maybe go more in depth on that. Ellie, do you have any other key things to add, like kind of basics?
Yeah. You need to make sure that everybody involved is always updated on what's happening. We this year had we have a business and media team, and they were always keeping the website updated, which is really nice because the rest of us didn't have to worry about that. So everybody who's involved, you need to make sure they're always being updated. In terms of training, you also want to make sure that everybody's familiar with the programs and stuff that you're using, especially like the robots and stuff. We made sure that most of our counselors had a kit to work with so that they could show a robot example and be like, this is your problem, this is how to fix it, and I can show you how to do that on screen. And then make sure that everybody has a good time and that everybody's flexible and knows what's happening. That's what I would say. If you have more questions, you can always email us at davisyouthrrobotics@citruscircuits.org. I think that email is also on our website if you wanted to get in contact with us and ask us more about the virtual Robocamps or our outreach in general.
I think that's all we have time for. I will post the email that you can ask all your questions to in the chat, so you can access that. And I think that's all. Thank you guys for showing up and watching our virtual RoboCamps presentation. Hope you had a good time.